everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, I thought I'd take the opportunity to show you guys how to create a plugin for WordPress. So for this video here, I'm assuming you already have knowledge or you're already experienced with PHP. As the approach that I'll be taking with this plugin setup is a class-based approach. So if you're not familiar with classes, maybe jump onto ChatGPT and ask it how to create a class in PHP, or go onto YouTube and maybe search up some videos on how to work with classes in PHP. Now, when creating a WordPress plugin, you don't necessarily have to use a class-based approach. But I prefer doing it with a class because I just find that it helps me keep my code more organized, and it's also a more scalable approach. So I'm going to go ahead here and get started. So currently I'm in VS Code. So you'll notice here that I have my folder structure. In the very root of my folder, I have a file called kindleposttypes.php. So this is pretty much the entry point to my WordPress plugin. You can call this file whatever you want. It could be index.php. It could be, my first plugin.php. You can name it anything you want to name it. So in this case here, this is a plugin that I created for an LMS system that I created. It's called Kindle LMS. So in this base file here, you'll notice that at the very top, I have some metadata that I'm defining. This is required for WordPress. So you'll see here that I'm defining the name of the plugin. So plugin name, the plugin URI, which is just the Kindle domain, kindle.ca. I'm just giving it, and then I'm giving it a description, the version number, the author URI, which is the same as the plugin URI. I'm defining the license, and then the license URI, and then the text domain. And then after that, we have some code here. First thing I'm doing, I'm just adding a quick check here to make sure that users aren't accessing the file directly. If they are, it's just going to kill the script, so it won't continue running any of this code down here, just beneath this. So I'm just basically checking to see if the WP inc or the absolute path constants exist. If they don't, we exit out and we just kill the script. Right, so it's kind of a security measure, right? So it's very good to have that in your base file. After that, I have some constants here that I'm quickly defining, which I'm going to be using throughout the development of my plugin. I don't necessarily use all of them, but these are some of the essential ones that I like to set up in case I need them. So the first one here is I'm just setting the base version. So I'm just creating a constant for the version of the plugin. Again, I'm setting that to 1.00, and if you go back up here to the metadata, you'll see that I also defined it here as 1.00. So if you were to update the plugin in the future, you would have to update that here. You could also update that here, right? So it gets updated, in the application in case you need this constant. Okay, so I have a couple of constants here. I have a base path that I'm setting up and a base URI. These are just a relative path, and then there's an absolute path that I'm just configuring in case I need them to load certain files. And then I also have an assets URL constant that I'm defining. This just points to an assets folder. Currently, I don't have an assets folder, but if I were to have some assets that I needed for this plugin, I would just create an assets folder in the root directory of my plugin. And that assets folder would typically store like my CSS files, my JavaScript files, and my images. And then the last constant here, this is the language domain. And I'm just setting that to Kindle CPT pack. And then finally, we actually initialize the plugin itself. So the actual base class for the plugin is in this includes folder, right? So here you'll see that I'm using the base path constant. And then I'm just making a call to the includes folder, and I'm loading the class.posttypes.php file. Okay, so that's the actual like base file of my plugin. So this is where all of my initial WordPress configuration work is done. And then if we go into the includes folder, we'll load up class.posttypes.php, and this is the actual like entry point into the plugin application. This is the like the base class that communicates with all other classes that I configure for my plugin. So for instance here, if we look right at the top of the script here, and actually let me make this, let me make this code a little bit larger. Yeah, so I'll make that a little bit larger so you can kind of you can kind of see here a little bit closer to what I coded. So I am going to have all this code posted on my website, so you guys will have a point of reference. And the website is going to be digitalodyssey.ca. I'll have a link down to that down below in the description. Okay, so here in here in the class posttypes.php file, right at the very top, I have an include. This is calling a post type factory. So if you notice here in the directory folder under my includes, I have a factories folder. So there's another class here called post type factory. And just as a naming convention, I always like to put class before the actual name of my file, so I know that this is a class. This file is hosting some class code. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Right. So here, so if I open up this file here, you'll see that I have a post type factory class, and this pretty much just has a public function, which I'll be calling shortly to register new post types. So a factory, if you're an experienced PHP coder, a factory is essentially just something that kind of is just that you can repurpose for multiple use cases. So let me go back here to my post types class. Okay, so here at the top, we're including that post type factory, which we are going to initialize in our actual base class. Okay, so you'll see here, if class exists, Kindle CPT, or sorry, if it doesn't exist, we are going to create it. So class Kindle CPT pack, that's what I decided to name this particular plugin or this particular class, which is the base class for my plugin. Here I'm defining some private variables. So I'm going to be holding a reference, or I'm going to be instantiating the post type factory and storing it in this variable here. And then I'm defining what my first post type that I'm going to create is going to be called. So courses post type, and that's going to be the post type here itself. Then I'm holding a kind of a reference to my language domain constant, right? I'm just loading it here or storing it here in the language domain variable. And again, here in my base path variable, I'm just holding a reference to that base path constant, right? Which were defined in our actual base class here, or our actual base file. And the reason I like to do that is because I don't like to copy and paste these constants all throughout my code. I think it looks kind of messy, and it looks kind of, I just prefer doing it like this. That's just my personal preference. You don't necessarily have to do this, but personally I like doing it like this. I just like holding a reference to those constants and then using these particular variables throughout my code. So you'll notice here, if we scroll down, so this language domain is actually being called here in several parts of my code, but I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so after we define our private variables, we have our constructor, so public function construct. This is essentially where we initialize and set up essentially everything that we're going to need for our plugin. So you'll notice here that I'm instantiating my post type factory, right? So again, I'm referencing this post type variable here, which is at the top level scope of the class. After that, I'm just running a few WordPress functions, which is the add action function, right? And these are all hooking into the init. So these first two functions here, they hook into the WordPress init. So when WordPress initializes, we execute this callback here. So these callbacks are actually functions that are defined here within this base class. So load language support. So the first action here is loading the language support, which in turn calls load plugin text domain. And again, this is calling the language domain, which is being referenced up here in this language domain variable. And then we pass in some additional parameters here, which are required for load plugin text domain. And then we pass in the actual path to our languages folder. And if you notice here in the folder structure, we have a languages folder. And that's where our our MO or NPO files are stored. So these are our language files here. If you're not sure how to create these language files, you actually need a program called POEdit, which you can use to to translate your plugin or your theme. So we have that one there, and then we have another action here that we're using to register our post types. So I'm calling so my callback method for this is ln register post types. So you'll notice down here we have a function called ln register post types. So here we are registering our courses custom post type. All right, so I'm just defining some arguments here, which gets passed into gets passed into the register new post type function, which again is hosted into the in the post type factory class. All right, so here I'm just basically checking to see if the post type doesn't exist, then we go ahead and create it. Right, so if not equivalent to post type exists, this course is post type. Then we call the post type factory, we call the register new post type method, and we pass in all of the arguments that we need to pass in order to create the post type. And then lastly, we have we're calling another action which hooks onto deactivated plugin. So basically when we deactivate the plugin from WordPress, this callback gets executed, ln plugin deactivation callback, right? And then here I'm just unregistering the post type that I created. So this basically just removes the post type from the WordPress admin menu. It doesn't delete any data that was created for that, for the post type that was essentially created. If you need to delete any data associated with the post type, you're going to have to do some additional cleanup work for that. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to unregister the post type. Okay, so that pretty much covers the base class. And then at the very bottom here, we need to instantiate this class in order for it to actually run. So I'm just making a call to it, Kindle CPT pack equals new Kindle CPT pack, and that actually fires the class and instantiates it and creates it and gets set up and running. And then let's just take a quick look here at the post type factory. So again, the post type factory, the sole purpose of this factory is just to create new post types. So if we look at the code here, register new post type, we're passing in several arguments. We are passing in the post type name, and then we need to pass in the singular name, the plural name, the language domain, and then arguments if we need any, right? Or you could just leave this blank. You don't necessarily have to pass this one in, which is why I'm adding a default directive here. Yeah, so here we have our labels array, which sets up all of the labels for our post type. Then we have our default arguments for our post type, right? So this is where we configure the singular name, language domain, and then we pass in our labels, which is this array here, right? And then we also set what this plugin can support. So the rest of these variables here or parameters are all hard-coded. If you wanted to extend the functionality of this function, you could add in, you could maybe pass in another array or maybe some additional parameters if you need to make some of these true or false dynamically. Then at the end here, we are creating a final args variable, and we're just merging these two arrays together using the array merge method, which is actually a PHP method. And then we're just calling the register post type method, which is a WordPress method, and we're passing in our post type and we're passing in our final arguments. And that's it. So that actually registers our post type. So that's pretty much it for this video here. I just wanted to show you guys my approach to how I structure WordPress plugins when I'm working on plugins. This is essentially the approach I like to take. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to set this up as a class. I mean, if you wanted to, you could just have one base PHP file and you could just have like a bunch of functions in here and WordPress would read that just fine. But again, this is the approach I like to take because it keeps all of my code nice and organized. It keeps my, my register post type code neatly tucked away in its own factory. So it doesn't become obtrusive. It's kind of just tucked away in its own, in its own factories folder here. And I can essentially use this anywhere throughout my plugin code, right? Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this video. I'm going to have this code posted up on my website in the next few days, so you guys will have a point of reference. And I'll even zip this up and post it on my website so you guys can actually download the files and take a look at them, play with them, install it if you want, just to ensure that it works. Yeah, so this is a great starting point for creating WordPress plugins. You know, and I should just mention here that if you want to extend this and add more functionality, so if you wanted to create meta options for your post types, you can do that in the constructor. So when the constructor runs, you know, you can do register post types, you can do register meta options, and you can do, you know, whatever you want. Everything gets initialized here in the factory, or sorry, in the constructor. Okay, so guys, that's pretty much it for this video here. I hope you guys liked it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. And again, I will have this code posted on my website in the next few days, so you guys can check it out there. And as soon as that's up, I'll have the link down below in the description so you guys can access it directly. So anyways, guys, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.